we carry all this guilt and shame around money
Mm.
because we want to provide for our kids because we're feeling bad about the divorce. And we're like, wait a minute, how can I still give them the lifestyle that I want? And as entrepreneurs, it gets to be even more challenging because we're working so hard to build up this business so that we can find that financial freedom. And if this is you in this rut, it's time to sit back and say to yourself, how can I make a change with my money so that I'm not chasing after it, but I'm pursuing it? If you're tired of feeling shame about past financial decisions, worried you'll never achieve financial stability, and ready for a clear plan to take control of your money and experience true financial freedom, you're in the right place. Hey, I'm Lisa, wealth activator, independent insurance broker, and your guide to rewriting your money story. I learned the secret to creating financial freedom and stability after divorce, and I'm ready to share it with you. If you're ready for steady, stress-free income, clarity with your money, and the confidence to spend without guilt, grab your favorite essential oil, take a deep breath, and let's sniff our way through the smell of money. Today, we're going to be hearing from a special guest, Becky Sampson. She is the founder of Only Subpoenas. She is a divorce strategist who helps women navigate divorce with strength and compassion. She's known as the Bulldog Becky Brockovich. Remember Erin Brockovich? After representing herself through 21 subpoenas and 3.5 years in court, she now equips women with legal strategies, confidence, and tools to leave empowered, not defeated. So if this episode is for you and you know someone that wants to hear this, please share that with them. And just, if you're listening, go grab a nice cup of coffee or a cool drink, get rid of all those distractions, and come hang out with us for the next 15 minutes. Thank you so much, Becky, for being here. I love that. The
Thank you
Bulldog.
for
Bulldog
having me.
Becky Brockovich.
Bulldog Becky Brockovich. I think I've always been that way, but it really, really came out when I entered into the legal system. By the way, I'm not an attorney. I'm not a licensed paralegal. I just found a niche and that's why Becky Brockovich, if you know Erin Brockovich, she knew nothing about the law before she got into it. And she was just an everyday person, just like I was. And when you get into it, and when I went through 21 subpoenas and 21 hearings during my second divorce, surely, and representing myself for most of it, I had to jump in and learn the system, learn the rules of the game, so to speak.
Mhm.
And so now I definitely help people navigate through that. I can't give legal advice, but I can definitely point them in the right direction and say, this is
Well, I
where you
know.
can find your rights.
Yeah. Hands-on experience is way better than any schooling.
Yes.
I was a paralegal. I was, went to school to become a paralegal, and I did bankruptcies and real estate, and I did
Oh,
some law. Like I, played a little bit with the law and everything. I did not like, divorce law. I didn't like estates or anything like that. So I kind
yeah.
of stuck with the bankruptcy and with the real estate, but it was very dry and very boring. It wasn't fulfilling to me, but the hands-on experience beats it. 21 subpoenas is a lot. So tell us about this. Like, you're happily married. No one grows up and gets married and says, oh, I'm going to end
Nope.
up divorced. So 21 subpoenas. What was the big fight about?
So here's what I was kind of thinking about this before we came on the podcast. And I was thinking about possibly where so many women, and I talk about this on my podcast as well, but so many women feel like they are not contributing as much to a marriage as maybe a husband that's providing financially. Now, I've been divorced twice. I'm actually happily married now to the love of my life. So yay, there's hope. And it's really his fault, my husband's fault now that I'm in the business that I'm in, because the first divorce, we never even saw any court. We didn't go to an attorney or anything like that. We just signed off. And I will say it was difficult. And I made some financial choices. Like I was just telling you, Lisa, I actually had a condo at the point. And because I was so unwilling and so emotionally distraught, I was not willing to move out and rent that out. So I ended up losing it to foreclosure, which is I'm not somebody that actually lives with a lot of regret, but I look back now and just think, man, I wish I would have just humbled myself a little bit more and saw what I was doing to myself financially and be able to keep that, because that was like 16 years ago. And I would have been in a very different position, having a steady income for all those years. And even with my background in real estate, my second husband became very critical of me because of that. He's like, Becky, you were a real estate agent. You knew better than that. I was like, yeah, but that doesn't mean that I wasn't going through an emotional turmoil. And that was my safe space. And I didn't want to let it go. But my second marriage, I was single for 8 years, married the second time. Told him, hey, this is my last rodeo. I've done dating coaching. I've done relationship coaching, wrote books, did workshops, did radio shows about dating, all of that. And I married my second husband. We ended up in Hawaii on our honeymoon. He ended up getting offered a job to work there because he was a former police officer. And on our honeymoon, the very last day, he gets offered this. And I was like, what the? Are we moving to Hawaii? He's like, yeah, let's go. Let's do it, And most of my coaching in all of it was locally here on the mainland. And I pretty much packed up my whole life to follow him and support him in going out there. I didn't need to make money. We made plenty of money between his retirement and the other, although I was still reaching out and doing things. I started a TV show out in Hawaii, a community TV show, after years and years of podcasting and radio, TV, all that stuff. But then I started going into an education, and we got free education. And so he's like, just make that your full-time job. And about 4 months after I moved to Hawaii, he turned to me and he's like, okay, well, we got to, prepare our taxes. And he wanted me to sign a fraudulent tax return. And I said to him, this is just over a year being married total. And I mustered up enough courage to stand up to him because he was 18 years older than I was. And I said to him, look, if you're going to do the taxes like that, I'm not going to sign it. I don't play that game. And 10 minutes later, he turns to me and says, Becky, we need to get divorced, and we need to get divorced fast. And I was like, what? And a couple weeks later, I kind of sat him down because I'm like, what is going on? Like what? And I'm not saying that there wasn't other issues, but nothing that couldn't be resolved. And I sat him down and I said to him, look, why don't you tell me like everything that you're bothered with when it comes to me in the relationship? And I'm the type of person, everybody knows me, like I don't go anywhere without my little book. So I was like, wait, hold on. I got to go get my book. So I grabbed my book and I said, tell me everything. And he's like, oh yeah. Write this one down. And so I start writing it down. And luckily that day I was somebody that nothing was really sticking to me. And I wrote it down. I said, okay, what else? Wrote it down. What else? Wrote it down. And he was like so proud to tell me all these things that he didn't like about me. I'm having a really hard time seeing the value that you bring to my life.
Wow.
And my response, thank goodness, was probably one of the biggest pivotal moments in my life, because at that point I'd never really stood up for myself. But I finally turned to him and I said, here's the good news. I know the value that I bring to your life. Whether or not you choose to see it or not is none of my business. And that was a defining moment where I said, look, if this is what your decision is, and it took another 7 months before I served him divorce papers. But I ended up serving him divorce papers at the airport on April Fool's Day, which is not something I meant to do, 2020, because the whole world was shutting down. And he chose to leave the island and leave me there with very little. Although, he was trying, anyway, it's a big, long story, but I served him the divorce papers and he was really shocked at that because he had a different plan. And that was really another defining moment for me to say, you know what? I left that airport when I dropped him off, knowing that he was going to be served with tears in my eyes because this was not something I wanted in my life. And I said, please, God, keep my heart soft towards him. And that was very fortuitous because it was very difficult because he dragged me through a 3.5-year court case. We were less than 2 years married and wasn't willing to leave anything, was not willing to split anything. And I wasn't willing to allow him to do that to me, especially when there was a lot of increase because of my efforts. And so I think a lot of women sometimes look at that and just go, well, I didn't have a job. I didn't bring money in. What value did I bring? And I love eventually I really represented myself up against 5 attorneys for most of it, but I eventually got an attorney when he had to pay for one. And this attorney calls me one day and I was trying to prove all these things that I had done to, in the marriage. And he says, Becky, I don't care if you sat on a couch, ate bonbons, and gained 100 pounds. You are still entitled to half of the financial increase in this marriage. And I said to him, thank you so much for not making me have to prove my very existence as a woman. And that started my whole journey. Subpoenas, that's not something I recommend right out of the gate. It's not something I'm all for collaborative divorce. That's how my first one was. But this one, he was unwilling to give anything. And so I had, in order for me to settle and to negotiate, I had to subpoena, and I mastered this ability to subpoena. And that created the leverage that I needed so that he would settle. Now, I always tell
Mhm.
people, just because they settle at trial or whatever does not mean that they pay the bill.
Right.
So it took me another year and a half of fighting him through a different court system, representing myself with a lot of research. And I ended up foreclosing on his house, ended up getting his house. He ended up having to pay me another $45,000 to get his house back. And so I say to people all the time, I won my case. And it's not that I won my case out of bitterness or out of resentment, but I won my case for a fair and equitable division
Mhm.
because I had the information I needed in order
Mhm.
to make a decision and to create the leverage I needed to for him to settle. So a
Mhm.
lot of times what I find is 44% of women coming out of divorce end up in financial, you probably know this more than anybody, end up
Yeah.
in financial poverty. And I
Mhm.
truly believe this is the case, Lisa, because they don't know their rights. They don't know their rights,
Right.
number one, and they don't know how to fight, and I should say advocate for
Right.
themselves.
Yeah, and it's so important because the biggest lie that they believe is that they can't afford to get help. And
Yep.
in reality, there's so much help that's out there. And what can you afford? Can you afford to constantly be angry and bitter because you didn't get your fair share? And my mom went through this with my dad, and I lived with it for decades
Yeah.
where, they were both entrepreneurs and they split everything except for the businesses. And my mom was put in way more than her fair share to build up the businesses, and when they split, she got nothing and had to start her business all over from the ground up. And she constantly complained and compared. And it's like, what are we focusing on? Why are we focusing on? But it was so bitter because she was the only person in her family at that time to get a divorce.
Mm.
So she felt that pressure of, I'm not good enough. And why couldn't I make my marriage last? There was all this self-hatred talk that really puts
Yeah.
us in this pit where we don't feel worthy or valuable. And I know a few of my clients have gone through this where, one celebrated her 28th wedding anniversary, and 2 weeks later, her husband served her with papers, and she's like, "Oh, huh? What?" He bought her a motorcycle and took her to Mexico
Yep.
to celebrate. And then all of a sudden, I got a girlfriend. I'm like, what? I mean, I wanted to go punch him in the face. Where's your loyalty? And after 28 years, and it hits hard. And then, she got a settlement. Was it fair and equitable? Not in my opinion, but the fight,
Well,
the urge to fight for that of what you deserve. There's a thing so my initial reaction when you said you were only married for 2 years, the second time, it's like, well, how much do you think you're actually worth? How much equity do you think you should get after 2 years? If
yep.
this person was 18 years older than you, so this was
Yep.
going through my mind.
Yep.
And this is what we believe. And then we justify it. Well, I don't deserve
Yep.
anything because I've only been here for 2 years and he's been established. But right, you said, this is and I like that increase because we
It's
miss that
increase.
gap. Yeah, we miss
So
that gap.
the thing is that people don't understand whether you're there for, and I got that kickback from a lot of people. Believe me, they're like, well, Becky, you're so into money. I said, it had nothing. Yes, it had something to do with money, but that's not what I was fighting for. I was really fighting that you say I have no value. Well, you
Right.
made the largest amount of increase since I became into the picture. So you can't tell me that I wasn't a part of that increase. And I always told him, I said, look, you have spent your whole life building up your financial. That is yours. And that is you and your kids and everything. But what we create together is ours. And it just so happened there was a lot of mistakes that he made that caused it to go even higher and higher and higher. But I was fighting for my life financially because here I am in Hawaii on an island that's very expensive, that I had now established a life and decided that I was finishing my education and all kinds of stuff. So the
Hmm.
justifications is what I'm telling is that yes, I thought oftentimes like I could just walk away. I could just
Hmm.
be like, but I knew that there was a bigger reason. And now I'm an entrepreneur helping a lot of people know their rights. And being a coach for the last 16 years, because I don't know if you know this, but 16 years ago, I lost 130 pounds. And as I was coming out my first divorce. And so my whole life changed when I got into the public scene, right? Like
Mhm.
started doing radio, TV, and coaching, all of that stuff. So I knew when I was going through this, I remember saying to my mom, I said, there's got to be a bigger reason why I'm standing so strong in this position so that I can help others serve other people. And now I've got a podcast bringing all these attorneys on, speaking about legal stuff. And people are calling me going, Becky, what do I do? And I'm like, okay, so here's the free resources. And I love that what you mentioned there. Look, I did not have money. I did not have an
Mhm.
income. I applied for 45 jobs, even though I run a multi-million-dollar business. I could not get hired. And so to me, that I was like, what? And then my self-esteem was going down. Do I really have value? Do people really see who I am and what I do? But I had to fight, like advocate. I don't like the fight. Fight
Mhm.
is just very, but to advocate for myself, to now, if you knew what, I mean, everything that I learned, it was my greatest education, and I don't regret 1 second, because one of the
Mhm.
ways that he treated me with devaluing me, not only did I stand up for myself financially, but now I'm in a beautiful relationship where I value him 10 times more because he sees the value that I bring to his life, and he tells me often. And so I always say, no matter what your relationships are, they serve a purpose, right? They're happening for you, not to you. And I
Mhm.
oftentimes had to remind myself of that when I was going through my divorce, because yeah, that I mean, my attorney that I eventually had was like, "Well, Becky, like it's a short marriage." And I'm like, "Yeah, but there's a huge increase that happened that would have never happened if I didn't step into the picture."
Mhm.
And so
Yeah.
it's, you are valuable whether or not there's a gal on TikTok right now that I follow. Same thing. Like, man, she never even worked in her marriage. Her husband stepped out, and she, so many similarities. Of course, she has kids. I didn't. But and I always tell people, if you have kids, that's even more of a reason why you need to advocate, because 2 or
Mhm.
3 years down the road, when you're like left with desolate with no money, and you're like, "Oh, shoot, I can't take them back to court." Most people don't know you can reopen your divorce case. By the way, you
Right.
can. There's very specific things that you need to do, and it's not always the strategy to do, but you can. And it happens to men too, because my husband was left with 21 cents after 27 and a half years marriage, and he never dealt with the finances. And I've always told him, I said, "You're never going to do that again. Not with me.
Right.
Everything's transparent." So it happens on both sides. And I think financially, here's the good news is that you can always create your future. You can
Mhm.
always end up moving forward and having something to look forward to. So if you're an entrepreneur, I happen to turn mine into a business. I mean, with only subpoenas, we do subpoenas for attorneys, and the attorneys, I make sure it's 100% compliant, because that's statistically 1 out of every 3 subpoenas that's issued, even out of an attorney's office, gets rejected. And they get
Mhm.
rejected because they're non-compliant. And
Mhm.
so I make sure they're 100% compliant, or they don't pay me. That's my
Mhm.
guarantee, because that's how important this evidence is. And a lot of people in their court cases come to me and will be like, "Well, Becky, why is my attorney not doing subpoenas?" I'm like, I can tell you why they don't do them. They're a bit of a headache. But what my point is that even no matter what you've been through, you can create a business out of it, helping and serving other people in so
Mhm.
many different, but listening to your heart. It happened to be my husband that was like, "Becky, you're so good at this." We were in another court case, and a paralegal messed up and it got rejected. And I did it. I sent her the instructions to do it correctly. And that's when he turned to me and he's like, you have to help people. You have to get out there and do this." So it was an encouragement of him. And I always tell him, I'm like, all my success is going to come. I'm going to blame you for my success.
Well, that's
Yeah.
that's a great way to a great thing to be blamed for is success. And I liked how you I'm glad that you pointed that out, because a lot of women would sit back and say, "Well, no, I'm not valuable." And
No.
holding on to our value is the most important thing that we can do. and just encouraging ourselves because we are our best asset. And if we don't believe we're valuable, no one is going to believe it. And then we're going to get exactly what we desire, which is crap because we don't think we deserve it. So the
Well,
self-talk, the self-love is so important, and recognizing that, wait a minute, and standing up. Like if it was for the moms out there, if it's your child in that situation, you are going to stick up for them. You are going to fight for them.
absolutely.
We need to put that energy on ourselves, towards ourselves, and do the same thing.
I mean, you have to recognize those sometimes. I mean, that's the reason why you're getting divorced, is there may be some unhealthy behaviors between the two, and you might have been beaten down. Um, and I'm not immune to that either. I mean, I've allowed a lot of that in my life. And that's why that was the best thing he could have said to me that day, because
Mhm.
that allowed me an opportunity to go, no, I know
Mhm.
the value that I bring to your life. And then having an attorney say, you don't need to justify. I was like, thank you.
Right.
And that's
Yeah.
what I really remind women and men that have been beaten down as well.
Yeah, because it works both ways. So you've
Hmm.
mentioned your podcast a couple of times. I know it's probably worth a gold to our listeners as far as the attorney point of view. What's the name of your podcast?
So my podcast is on YouTube. It's called Divorcing Strong. And so it's
Perfect.
all about coming through that process strong financially, emotionally, spiritually, and mentally.
And
Yeah.
going through divorce is challenging enough. Going through divorce without the information and knowledge that you need is worse. So
Yep.
informing yourself, getting the information. So besides the subpoenas, do you help divorced men and women in any other way?
Yes. So I do. If you go to BeckySampson.com, that's more my coaching. I take one-on-one clients, and I will be eventually starting a group called The Gathering, which is we meet once a week and go over a different aspect of divorce when it comes to your rights. Because I focus a lot on knowing what your rights are so that you can make informed decisions. And again, I don't give legal advice. I just say what's out there and how to find the information that you need so that you can be educated and have the knowledge. Knowledge is really power when it comes to divorce.
Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely. Well, thank you for doing that. I'm so glad that we have this wonderful resource in you, and that you've taken your experience and actually have turned around and helped those, because it is scary and there's so many emotions involved. And, it's hard to gather our thoughts and think, okay, what's the next step? So really
Yes.
having this down and having a step-by-step, guide, and someone who's been through it that can say, oh, wait a minute, these are your rights and this is what you can do. Knowing that and then deciding on what the next step is so important. So thank you so much, Becky, for
Oh,
being here, for sharing your story and all the things that you went through. For those of you listening, please check the show notes, subscribe to Becky's channel, get informed. And, even if you're someone who's not quite divorced and you're thinking about it, I know it's a scary decision and there's a lot of thoughts going in your head, a lot of manipulation. Get the facts, make the decision, start taking care of yourself, because this is where you're going to show up in power. And when it comes to your finances, it doesn't have to cost an arm and a leg to get a divorce. You can do it on a very scarcity budget. Becky did it with no money.
I I had nothing. He spent over $150,000 fighting me. I had nothing, and
Yeah.
I was able to get through it. You can do it too. I know it.
Yes. So you can do it. It doesn't matter what your checkbook says. It matters of what your thoughts say and those actions that you take, because whatever you put your mind to will happen. And remember, it doesn't matter how much money you have. It's what you do with it.
Yep.
Hey, mompreneurs, I hope you enjoyed today's episode. If so, please follow the show and share it with a friend who's rebuilding her finances after divorce. No spreadsheets, no restrictive budgets, only confidence to build financial freedom. Also, please drop a quick 5-star review so more moms starting over can find this. It lights me up to know this podcast is helping you. Inhale confidence, exhale scarcity. I'll meet you back on Tuesday for another episode. It doesn't matter how much money you have, it's what you do with it.